The scent of sizzling ribs and slow-smoked brisket drifted through the neighborhood, a promise of a good time wrapped in the rich aroma of hickory wood. People were laughing, kids were running around with sticky fingers, and the sound of an old-school R&B playlist filled the air. It was a perfect Saturday afternoon. Until she showed up. Karen. There she was, standing at the edge of her yard, arms crossed so tight it looked like she was holding herself together by sheer will. Her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval, her eyes narrowing at the plumes of smoke rising from my grill like they personally offended her. She had complained about my mailbox being an inch too high. She had complained about my lawn being too festive at Christmas. And now, she had finally found her ultimate battle, the barbecue. She didn't say a word at first. Just stood there, stewing, taking deep, dramatic breaths as if my perfectly seasoned meat was poisoning her lungs. Then, with the exaggerated urgency of a soap opera villain, she whipped out her phone and started dialing. I sighed. She's doing it. My best friend Tony, already 2 plates deep into the feast, wiped his mouth. Nah man, she's bluffing. Karen turned, made eye contact with me, and spoke into the phone loud enough for everyone to hear. Yes, I'd like to report an illegal gathering. Yes. There's excessive smoke, loud noise, and possibly hazardous conditions. It's extremely disruptive. She paused, nodding like the dispatcher could see her, then added the cherry on top. It smells like chemicals. Tony whistled. Oh, she's committed. I waved at her. Karen, you're calling the cops on barbecue smoke? On a Saturday? In America? She turned away from me like I was beneath her, still murmuring into her phone, her voice dripping with the kind of self-righteousness that made HOA meetings unbearable. The party went quiet for a second, people exchanging looks, unsure whether to keep eating or start running like we were fugitives. I rolled my eyes. All right, everyone, place your bets. 5 minutes before the cops get here. Laughter rippled through the group, but there was still tension. This was the 3rd time she had tried something like this in the past year, and while I usually shrugged it off, today felt different. This wasn't just about a barbecue. This was about a power move. She wanted to win. 10 minutes later, the sirens arrived. 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of my house, lights flashing but sirens mercifully silent. A few people started shifting nervously, but I knew better. I walked up to meet the officers before Karen could, throwing on my best host smile. One of the officers, a middle-aged guy with a weary expression that screamed, "I hate my job today," stepped forward. "We got a call about," he sniffed. "A disturbance?" I gestured behind me. "Yep, a serious one. Best brisket this side of the city. You guys want a plate?" The other officer, younger, barely hiding a smirk, elbowed his partner. "Told you it was a barbecue call." Karen stormed over before I could enjoy the moment. "Excuse me, officer. This man is creating a public nuisance. That smoke is toxic. My allergies are acting up. And the noise. This is a residential neighborhood, not a frat house." The older officer gave her a look that I had only seen dads give their kids when they asked why they couldn't have candy for dinner. "Ma'am, we're here for a disturbance. Not a cookout critique." Karen gasped like she'd been personally insulted. "So, you're just going to let him do whatever he wants?" The officer sighed. "Well, unless he's violating a noise ordinance, setting an actual fire, or disturbing the peace, there's not much to do here." He glanced at my setup, nodding at the grill. "Looks safe to me." I clapped my hands together. "Well, that settles it. Officers, you're welcome to grab a plate. Might as well make the trip worth it." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "For real? Best ribs in town. Guaranteed." The older one hesitated, then shrugged. "Well, I am off duty in 20 minutes. Karen's face twisted into something resembling a melted wax figure. "You're seriously going to eat his food? After I called you to enforce the law?" The younger cop grinned. "There's no law against good barbecue, ma'am." Karen let out an actual screech, spun on her heel, and stormed back toward her house, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. Meanwhile, I handed the officers a plate each, and soon enough, they were sitting at one of the picnic tables, blending in with the rest of my guests. Tony leaned over. "Bro, you just turned a police call into a catering gig." I smirked. Adapt and overcome. The party continued, now with the added bonus of police presence that was actually enjoying themselves instead of shutting us down. The energy picked up again, the music got louder, and for the first time I thought maybe, just maybe, I had finally won against Karen. Then I saw her peeking through her blinds. I knew that wasn't the last of it. Because Karen? She never lost a battle without planning a full-scale war. The morning after the barbecue, I woke up to the sound of something rustling on my porch. For a brief moment, I thought it was the wind or maybe a stray cat, but when I opened the door, I found a stack of papers taped to my front door. My stomach sank before I even read them. At the top, in big, bold letters, were the words, "Notice of Violation." And beneath that, the dreaded acronym, HOA. I sighed, rubbing my face as I pulled the papers off the door. Of course, Karen hadn't let it go. The woman had probably stayed up all night printing this nonsense. I flipped through the pages, rolling my eyes at the accusations. Smoke violations, noise complaints, unauthorized social gathering. Apparently, I was running some sort of illegal operation right in my backyard. Tony, still half asleep and wearing last night's barbecue-stained shirt, shuffled out of my guest room with a yawn. "Dude, what's that?" I tossed the papers onto the kitchen counter. "Karen's revenge. She's got the HOA involved." He picked up the top sheet, squinting at it. "Man, how does she type so fast? This is like a full-blown lawsuit." It wasn't quite a lawsuit, but it was close. According to the notice, I had a formal violation hearing in a week, and if I lost, I could be fined or even barred from hosting large-scale events ever again. My backyard barbecue empire was officially under attack. The worst part? Karen had gone door to door and collected signatures from some of the other neighbors. Some of them were the usual suspects, people who never liked me in the first place, but there were a few names on that list that surprised me. People who had eaten my ribs, who had laughed at my joke. "Betrayal, thy name is backyard politics." Tony whistled. "So what's the plan? Pack up and surrender, or are we fighting back?" I grinned, grabbing a cup of coffee. "Oh, we're fighting back. But we're doing it the right way." The first step was gathering intel. I had never actually read the full HOA handbook, but if I knew Karen, she probably hadn't either. She was the type to skim the rules, just enough to weaponize them. So I spent the next few hours diving into every regulation, every loophole, and every gray area. And then I found something interesting. Technically, my barbecue had been a private event. But there was nothing in the bylaws preventing public events, especially if they were community-based and served as a neighborhood improvement initiative. The moment I saw that clause, an idea hit me. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I was going to play smart. By the end of the day, I had a new flyer printed out, and this one wasn't a summons. It was an invitation. The first ever neighborhood barbecue festival, open to everyone, featuring food, games, and live music. And the best part? I had already reached out to the local police department, who were more than happy to stop by and supervise. Tony looked over my shoulder as I stapled the first flyer onto a community board. "Bro, you're really doing this?" I grinned. "Oh, I'm really doing this." Karen saw the flyer before noon the next day. I knew this because I saw her staring at it, mouth twitching in barely contained rage. For a moment I thought she might rip it down, but she just turned on her heel and stormed off. The storm was coming. That night my doorbell rang. I expected another nasty letter, maybe even a confrontation, but what I didn't expect was Karen standing there with a smirk on her face, holding a stack of documents. "Nice little stunt you're pulling," she said sweetly, though the venom in her tone was impossible to miss. I folded my arms. "Thanks. I try." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Do Do you really think you can turn the entire neighborhood against me? I laugh. Karen, you turn the entire neighborhood against yourself. Her smile dropped. You're making a mistake. I took the papers from her hands, flipping through them. Another HOA complaint. Another attempt to shut me down. But this time, she had gone further. She had filed a petition to limit community gatherings, to only board-approved events. If she got enough signatures, she could actually change the rules. I sighed. You ever just go to a movie or something? Like, do normal people things? Karen's eyes narrowed. I'm going to win this. I leaned against the doorframe. Guess we'll see. The next few days were a battle of signatures. Karen went door to door pushing her petition, while I did the same with mine. It felt like a full-blown political campaign, except the stakes weren't just some HOA rule. They were my right to grill in peace. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get more ridiculous, the sabotage began. First, my grill mysteriously disappeared from my backyard. I found it the next morning sitting on the curb, a handwritten note attached that simply said, "Fire hazard." Then, my festival posters started vanishing overnight, ripped from bulletin boards, even the ones in local stores. When I asked around, no one had seen anything. No one admitted to anything. But I had my suspicions. And then came the ultimate betrayal. One of my biggest allies had been Mr. Thompson, the guy 3 houses down, who always showed up to my BBQs with a 6-pack and a new grilling technique to test out. But when I knocked on his door to confirm his attendance for the festival, he wouldn't even meet my eye. "Look, Jay," he muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "I just think, maybe it's best if we keep things peaceful." Peaceful? I repeated, incredulous. "You love barbecue. You love my barbecue." He winced. I know. But Karen's got connections, man. She's talking about getting the city involved. Health inspections. Noise fines. I just can't be part of that." I stared at him, then exhaled. "So that's how it is." He nodded, looking ashamed. "I'm sorry, man." I walked away without another word. That night, as I sat in my backyard, staring at the empty spot where my grill used to be, Tony plopped down beside me. "So, what now?" "She's pulling every dirty trick in the book." I tapped my fingers against the armrest of my chair. "Now? We go bigger." Tony raised an eyebrow. "Bigger than a barbecue festival?" I smiled. "Way bigger." Because Karen had made one mistake. She thought this was just about barbecue. She thought it was just about some neighborhood dispute. But what she didn't realize was that she had sparked something in me. I wasn't just going to win. I was going to make sure she never forgot it. The morning of the barbecue festival arrived, and the air was thick with the scent of smoked meat and the unspoken tension of an impending showdown. The setup had been flawless. Rows of tables lined the park, covered with checkered tablecloths. Vendors from all over the city had agreed to come, turning what had started as a neighborhood event into something much bigger. A few live bands had set up on a small stage, sound-checking their instruments. Balloons and banners stretched across the street, welcoming guests. The aroma of ribs, brisket, and burgers filled the air, mingling with the distant sound of laughter and chatter. It should have been perfect, but something was off. Karen had been suspiciously quiet for the past 24 hours. Too quiet. She hadn't sent another notice. No more threats. No more surprise HOA violations. It wasn't like her to give up without a fight. Which meant she was planning something. Tony nudged me as I checked over the grill. "I don't trust it, man. Feels like the part in the movie where the villain's just waiting for the hero to drop their guard." I nodded, scanning the crowd. "She's got something up her sleeve. We just don't know what yet." The event started strong. People were showing up in droves, many of them holding plates piled high with food. Even some of the neighbors who had sided with Karen initially were here, their noses leading them toward the buffet tables despite whatever promises they'd made to her. The local news had even shown up, covering the festival as a feel-good community story. I did a quick interview, talking about how the festival was about bringing people together, not dividing them. The whole time, I kept looking over my shoulder. Karen was nowhere in sight. Then, just as I was starting to think maybe, just maybe, she had finally thrown in the towel, the fire trucks arrived. 3 of them, lights flashing, sirens off, but their presence unmistakable. A fire marshal stepped out, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the scene with calculated authority. People started murmuring. The music softened as the band stopped playing. The energy of the event shifted from excitement to confusion. And then Karen stepped out from behind them. She was wearing a smug little smile, holding a piece of paper in one hand like it was a royal decree. "Jay," she called out, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "Looks like you've got a little problem here." The fire marshal approached me, flipping through his paperwork. "Sir, we received multiple complaints about an unauthorized open flame event. We need to conduct an inspection." I clenched my jaw. "Are you serious?" Karen folded her arms, eyes gleaming. "Fire safety is important, Jay. Wouldn't want anyone getting hurt." The fire marshal and his crew walked toward the grill stations, checking for violations. I knew everything was up to code. I had made sure of it. Fire extinguishers were in place, grills were spaced properly, nothing was illegal. But that didn't mean they wouldn't find something, anything, just to make things difficult. Tony leaned in, whispering, "She actually called the fire department on a barbecue festival. This woman is a supervillain." I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. "Yeah, well, I got a plan too." Karen stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching as the fire inspectors combed through the area. I walked up to her, keeping my voice low. "You're really willing to ruin this for everyone?" She tilted her head, smiling in that way that made me want to throw my tongs at her. "It's not personal, Jay. It's just rules." I chuckled, shaking my head. "You know what? You should have left it alone. Because now, you've given me the perfect excuse to go even bigger next year." Her smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly. "There won't be a next year. After today, the HOA will have all the proof it needs that these events are disruptive. Enjoy your little festival while it lasts." The fire marshal walked back over, glancing between us. "Everything's up to code. No violations. We're good here." Karen's jaw tightened. "Are you sure? Did you check the fuel sources? The spacing? The marshal cut her off. "Ma'am, everything is fine. This is a perfectly legal event. We're done here." Karen's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. The fire crew packed up and left, and within minutes, the festival returned to life, the interruption already fading into the background. But Karen wasn't done. I could see it in her eyes. She had one more play. The music kicked back in. People went back to eating. The mood started to recover. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Karen creeping toward one of the vendor tables, where an unattended grill sat, the chef distracted by a customer. I saw her glance around, then reach down toward the propane tank. I moved before I even thought about it. "Hey!" I shouted, charging forward. She yanked the valve, twisting it just enough to release a sharp hiss of gas before jerking her hand away like she hadn't just tried to create an actual fire hazard. I reached the tank just in time, tightening it back up before anything could happen. A few people nearby turned toward the commotion, and then silence spread through the crowd as more people realized what had just happened. Karen straightened up, feigning innocence. "Oh, I didn't." But it was too late. The whole festival had seen it. A camera flashed. One of the local reporters, who had been covering the festival, lowered their phone, eyes wide. "Did you just—" Tony stepped forward, shaking his head in disbelief. "Yo, you really tried to sabotage a barbecue festival? In front of the whole town?" Karen sputtered, but the damage was done. The police officers who had been hanging out at the festival didn't even hesitate. One of them stepped forward. "Ma'am, I think we need to have a conversation." As the officers led Karen away, the crowd broke into murmurs, some laughing, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The HOA board members who had been undecided before suddenly looked very sure of which side they were on. By the time Karen was escorted off the premises, she was completely alone. The festival continued, bigger and better than before. The news covered the entire thing, turning Karen into an unintentional local celebrity for all the wrong reasons. The HOA complaint? It disappeared, along with any credibility she had left. And by the time the sun had set, one thing was clear. Karen had lost, and I had won. As I stood by the grill, flipping the last round of ribs, Tony clapped me on the back. "Man, you turned a barbecue into a revolution." I laughed, shaking my head. "Next year's gonna be even bigger." And from the corner of my eye, I noticed something. A "for sale" sign going up in Karen's yard. Victory had never tasted so good.